Smoky Mountain Rose, an Appalachian Cinderella. Written by Alan Schroeder, pictures by Brad Sneed. Published by Dial Books for Young Readers. Read by Miss Tyler. This story has been written in a certain dialect, so when it is read aloud, it sounds like someone from the Appalachian culture. This may be different from what you are used to hearing. Since this is from a different culture, we should be polite and not laugh at words that are pronounced differently. Now listen. Smack in the heart of the Smoky Mountains, there was this old trapper living in a log cabin with his daughter. One night, while Rose was frying a mess of fish, the trapper he starts looking dejected like. "I reckon it's hard on ye not having a ma," he said. "Tell me, Rose, would you like me to get hitched again? There's a widder woman with 2 daughters down the road a piece. Way I see it, we'd all fit together neater'n a jigsaw." "I don't mind, Pa," said Rose, setting a plate of cornbread on the table. "You go a-courtin' if you think it's best." So before the huckleberries was fit for pickin', the trapper got himself hitched for the second time. That's when the trouble started a-brewin'. You see, Gertie, the new wife, she was just about the crossest, fiercenest woman that side of Tarbelly Creek, and her 2 daughters, why, they were so mean they'd steal flies from a blind spider. And vain? Them girls could waste a whole day admirin' themselves in the mirror. Rose, on the other hand, was a sweet little thing, always lookin' out for others and takin' care of sick critters and the like. Annie and 'Liza Jane, her stepsisters, couldn't stand the sight of her. To be ornery, they dressed her in the sorriest lookin' rags and made her do plumb every chore. Well, it just about broke the trapper's heart to see his daughter out milking the cow and collecting the firewood and churning the butter. He would have talked to Gertie about it, but talking to her was like kicking an agitated rattler. The trapper figured it was best to say nothing at all. This went on for a long time. Then one day the trapper up and died. Rose had loved her pa something fierce, and for days on end she couldn't stop a-weepin'. Rose's life was just about as hard as it could be, chores from sun-up to sundown. Course she thought of running away, but she didn't have anywhere to run to. She figured she just had to set it out and wait for a better day to come along. Now it so happens that on the other side of the creek there was this real rich feller, made his fortune in sow bellies and grits. Well, this feller wasn't hitched yet, so one day he gets the bright idea to invite all the neighbor people to a fancy old party, thinking he might find himself a wife. When Annie and 'Liza Jane got their invitation, they plumb near went crazy with excitement. Rose sort of figured she was invited too. When Annie and 'Liza Jane heard that, they started a-howlin', "Lord a mercy! Who'd want to dance with a dirt clod like you?" For the next few days they worked Rose like they was fixin' to kill her. Afore hour before sun was up, she'd be ironin' their dresses and polishin' their shoes and every other dern fool thing. Now Rose, she wanted to go to the party somethin' awful, but she held her tongue for fear of bein' laughed at again. The actual night of the shindig, the 2 sisters were downright hateful. Rose ran left and right trying to keep up with their demands. Finally, toward 7 o'clock, Gertie and her daughters piled into the tater wagon. Whipping the mule, they went a-rumblin' down the dirt road, chortlin' out "Skip-to-Maloo" at the top of their lungs. Rose, meanwhile, sat next to the pigsty and cried. Far off, across the creek, she could hear the sound of fiddle music. That made her cry even harder. Just then one of the hogs comes moseying up to the fence and starts talking to her. "You sure look miserable, honey, but don't you fret none. I know magic and I can help." Rose, she just stared, figuring she'd done lost her wits, but the hog kept right on talking. "First of all, we got to get you out of them rags. Now stand up and turn around real fast, like you got a wampus cat biting at your britches." Rose did just what the hog told her. When she looked down, she was wearing the purtiest party dress she ever laid eyes on. "I must be dreaming," she said to herself. The hog studied her real careful like. "Lookin' good, sister, but time's a-wastin'. We gotta get you over to that shindig. Go fetch me a mushmelon and 2 field mice." Again Rose did just what she was told. "Now watch," said the hog, and directly the mushmelon was turned into a big old wagon, and the mice 2 strong horses with silky manes and shiny teeth, real show critters. Rose was thrilled to pieces. She was all set to hop up on the wagon when the hog let out a big snort. "Why, look at them filthy bare feet. That won't do 'tall. Close your eyes. Now open 'em." Rose looked down. On each foot she was wearing a sparkling glass slipper. "You like 'em?" asked the hog. "Well," said Rose, trying to be polite, "they're not too practical for square dancing, but they sure are purty." The hog watched as Rose climbed up into the wagon. "Now don't forget, the spell's only good till midnight, so you gotta be home by then." "I'll remember," said Rose, and off she went a-rumbling down the dirt road, just as happy as can be. The shindig was even fancier than she'd reckoned. There were 2 fiddlers, a harmonica man, even a square dance caller come all the way from Nashville. Everybody was dancing and laughing and drinking cup after cup of sarsaparilla. Now the rich feller, he wasn't having such a good time. No one had caught his fancy, see, and then all of a sudden Rose came in through the big barn door. She looked so purty that everybody stopped dead in their tracks. The 2 stepsisters practically choked on their cider. "Well, shet my mouth," one of 'em whispered. "How'd she get in here, and where'd she get all them clothes? I oughta wring her neck," snapped the other. They watched, jaws a-droppin', as the rich feller went hurryin' up to Rose, thrustin' out his hand. "Pleased to meet you, missy," he said, real friendly. "My name's Seb. How about takin' a turn round the dance floor?" "My pleasure," said Rose, and off they went arm in arm. All evening long Rose and Seb kicked up their heels, having a high time. Gertie and her 2 daughters stood off to the side, matter 'n blazes. "Look at her," sneered Gertie, "sashaying round like she's the belly of the ball. I'll fix her when she gets home, give her a list of chores she won't ever finish." Just then Rose happened to glance at the big granddaddy clock in the corner. "Tarnation!" she cried. "It's midnight!" Without another word she went dashing out the barn door. Poor thing was running so fast one of her glass slippers went flying off into the dirt. She'd 'a' fetched it, but there warn't time. "Come back!" cried Seb, chasing after her. But Rose's wagon was already rattling down the road just as fast as it could go. No sooner was she out of sight than everything turned back the way it used to be. The wagon was a mushmelon again, and Rose had to walk home dressed in rags. Only thing that hadn't changed was the remaining glass slipper, which she tucked in her pocket for safe-keeping. Before going indoors, Rose stopped at the sty to say thank you. "Any time, sugar," said the hog. Now Gertie and her daughters, they came tearing home 'bout 10 minutes later. Rose was already asleep by the fire. The next day Gertie lit into Rose something awful. Grabbing the switch, she was all set to whip her when her 2 daughters came flying up the hill. "Listen, Ma," cried Annie, "that rich feller, he found Rose's shoe in the dirt, and now he's going round to every house to find the owner." "And that ain't all," said 'Liza Jane. "That feller, Ma, he's plumb crazy. Says he's gettin' hitched with the first person it fits on, and I reckon it's goin' to be me." "Well, then, hurry up and get ready," said Gertie, "and listen, y'all. Whichever of you gets the wedding ring and moves to Memphis, I'm coming along. You ain't leaving me behind." Then turning to Rose, Gertie warned, "You oughter stay out of sight." Half an hour later, Seb came rattling up the road in his wagon. Gertie was there, a-waiting on the porch, shucking peas. "Why, it's the Sal, Belly, and Grits fellers," she said, acting real surprised. "Come on in and set a spell. Understand you found my daughter's shoe." Before Seb had even said howdy do, Annie came flying out on the porch, sticking out her foot. "Me first!" she yelled, setting herself down on a big milk bucket. Now Seb, he commences to tugging and pulling, but getting the slipper onto her big foot was like trying to stretch a little bitty sausage skin over a side of beef. "Get out of my way," said 'Liza Jane, pushing her sister aside, and right away she starts a-batting her eyes at Seb. "I want to thank you for returning my shoe," she said. "I about fell into a fidget of fear when I saw it was gone." But Seb could tell she was just sweet-talking. The minute the tugging started, 'Liza Jane pert near went blue in the face. "Lemme get the axe," she said, a-gasping. "I'll get that shoe on if it kills me." Just then Seb spotted Rose standing off near the pigsty. "Weren't you at that shindig last night?" he called out. Rose went on feeding the hogs like she didn't hear him. "Come on over here and stick out your foot," Seb told her. He watched as Rose came a-walking towards him. "You look mighty familiar, missy. Come on now, just set yourself down here on this bucket and stick out your tootsie." Annie and 'Liza Jane held their breath as Rose stretched out her pretty little foot. "Now hold still," Seb told her, and wouldn't you know it, the slipper went gliding right on just as smooth as butter. When Gertie saw that, she started a-screeching, "That weasel, she's a-tricking you! My daughters are a heap purtier 'n her." But Seb, he didn't pay her no mind. Happy as a pig in a peanut patch, he took up Rose's hand and held it tight. "I knew I'd find ye," he whispered, and Rose nodded, all teary-eyed. Then, remembering the other slipper, she took it out of her pocket and put it on. Very same moment the hog started snorting and kicking up a fuss, and when Rose looked down again, she was wearing the same dress she had on at the shindig, looking just as purty as bluebonnets in spring. 'Pon seeing that, the two stepsisters, they done burst into tears. "Our precious little sister's gonna be marrying into money!" And they set to fussing over her like they just loved her to pieces. Now Rose, she could have turned her back on them, but she didn't. Sweet thing, she figured it was best to forgive and forget. "I love you like soup loves salt," she told 'em. And from then on, Annie and 'Liza Jane never gave her a moment of grief or heartache. And the wedding that followed? Well, it was just about the biggest shindig ever seen in the Smoky Mountains. To this day Rose and Seb are still living there, and folks reckon they're about the happiest twosome in all of Tarbelly Creek. Adapted text and cropped images for this read-aloud have been retrieved from Smoky Mountain Rose, written by Alan Schroeder, illustrated by Brad Sneed, published by Dial Books for Young Readers in 1997.